You can't save me." She shook, but the Mafia boss burned a city just to keep her safe. The rain in Harborview did not wash things clean. It only seemed to slick the grime deeper into the pavement, making the neon signs of the downtown district reflect like blurred, bloody smears on the asphalt. Inside the diner, the air smelled of stale coffee, burnt bacon, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that settled into the pores of everyone who worked the graveyard shift. Eva Carter wiped the counter for the 10th time that hour, her movements mechanical. At 29 years old, she felt ancient. Her back ached in a dull, throbbing rhythm that matched the flickering fluorescent light overhead. She kept her head down, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, fraying bun, trying to make herself as small and unnoticeable as possible. That was the rule. Be boring, be invisible, be nobody. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 3 in the morning, mentally. Eva calculated her tips. If she was lucky, she had made enough tonight to cover the electricity bill, the rent for her studio apartment, a closet-sized room with a drafty window and a lock that stuck, was due in 4 days. She was $30 short. She pulled her phone from her apron pocket and typed a quick text to Jamie, her only friend and the morning shift waitress who would be relieving her in 3 hours. Quiet night. Everything is fine. See you soon. It was a lie. Everything was not fine. Everything had not been fine for 3 years, not since she had run from the smoke and the screaming in a city 300 miles away. Eva slid the phone back into her pocket, her fingers trembling slightly. She looked out the front window, past the condensed steam on the glass. A dark sedan had been idling across the street for 20 minutes. Paranoia, she told herself. It is just paranoia. But the fear was a living thing in her gut, a cold stone that never dissolved. She turned back to the coffee machine, trying to steady her breathing. The bell above the door chimed, a harsh, jangling sound that made her shoulders jump. She did not turn around immediately. She focused on stacking white ceramic mugs, listening to the heavy tread of boots on the linoleum floor. It sounded like 3 men, maybe 4. They did not sit in a booth. They kept walking, past the counter, straight toward her station near the kitchen swing doors. Eva turned, forcing a customer service smile onto her face. The smile died instantly. 3 men stood on the other side of the counter. They were wet from the rain, their leather jackets creaking as they moved. They did not look like locals. They had the hard, weathered look of men who spent their lives breaking things. But it was the man in the middle who made the blood drain from Eva's face. He had a tattoo creeping up the side of his neck, partially hidden by his collar, a jagged, black geometric shape. The mark of the Kovac syndicate. The man smiled, revealing a gold-capped tooth. It was not a friendly smile. It was the look of a predator spotting a rabbit that had forgotten to run. "We found you," the man said. His accent was thick, Eastern European, clipping the edges of his words. Eva took a step back, her hip bumping against the metal prep table. She gripped a dirty rag like a shield. "I think you have the wrong person," she said. Her voice was thin, barely a whisper. "I am just a waitress." The man chuckled, a low, wet sound. He reached across the counter, his hand moving with terrifying speed, and grabbed her wrist. His grip was like a vice, fingers digging into her skin hard enough to bruise. "Do not play games, little accountant," he hissed. "Kovac wants his loose ends tied up. You have been running a long time." Eva tried to yank her arm back, but he was too strong. The other 2 men flanked him, blocking her exit to the kitchen. Panic, bright and blinding, exploded behind her eyes. They were going to drag her out the back door. They were going to put her in a trunk. And then the pain would start. "Please," Eva gasped, her free hand clawing uselessly at his glove. "Let me go. There are cameras here. We do not care about cameras," the man sneered. He yanked her forward, pulling her chest against the cold Formica counter. "You are coming with us. Now." The diner was empty save for an elderly man asleep in the far booth, but even if he woke up, he could not help her. Eva opened her mouth to scream, but the air seized in her throat. This was it. The past had finally caught up. Then the front door chimed again. It was not a hesitant sound. The door swung open with confidence, admitting a gust of cold, wet wind. The Kovac men did not turn immediately, focused as they were on their prey, but the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air grew heavy, charged with a sudden, suffocating pressure. "Gentlemen." A deep voice resonated from the entrance. It was calm, smooth, and utterly devoid of fear. "I believe you are in the wrong establishment." The man holding Eva's wrist stiffened. He turned his head slowly. Luca Moretti stood in the doorway. He was 34 years old, but he carried the weight of a man who had ruled this city for a decade. He wore a charcoal wool coat over a tailored suit that cost more than the diner itself. Raindrops glistened on his dark hair. He was not a physically massive man, not like the thugs surrounding Eva, but he occupied the space with the gravity of a black hole. Two of his own men stood silently behind him, shadows in the rain. Luca's eyes, dark and sharp as flint, swept the room. They took in the empty booths, the sleeping old man, and finally landed on the scene at the counter. His gaze dropped to the hand gripping Eva's wrist, and then rose to meet her terrified eyes. For a second, the world stopped. Eva felt exposed, raw under his scrutiny. He saw the terror. He saw the recognition. "Who are you?" the Kovac thug demanded. Though his grip on Eva loosened slightly, Luca walked forward. He moved with a predatory grace, his footsteps rhythmic and deliberate. He stopped 5 feet away, resting one hand casually in his coat pocket. The other hand hung loose at his side, dangerously close to the waistband of his trousers. "I am the man who owns the ground you are standing on," Luca said softly, "and I do not recall giving permission for Kovac soldiers to touch my city's people." The thug sneered, trying to regain his bravado. "This is none of your business, Moretti. We are just collecting a debt. It is internal." Luca tilted his head. He looked bored. "In Harborview, everything is my business, especially when it involves 3 men assaulting a woman in a place that pays me for protection." The thug tightened his grip on Eva again, pulling her arm so hard a sharp pain shot up to her shoulder. She whimpered, the sound involuntary. At that sound, Luca's boredom vanished. His eyes narrowed, turning into slits of obsidian ice. "Let her go," Luca ordered. The volume of his voice did not rise, but the command struck the room like a whip crack. "Or what?" the thug challenged. Luca did not blink. He nodded once to the man on his right, a towering enforcer named Silvio. Silvio moved before the Kovac thug could even flinch. It was a blur of motion, a wrist lock, a sickening crunch of cartilage, and the thug was slammed face first onto the counter. The grip on Eva's wrist broke instantly. The thug howled in pain, his arm twisted behind his back at an unnatural angle. The other 2 Kovac men reached for their jackets, reaching for weapons, but they froze when they heard the distinctive click of hammers cocking. Luca's second guard had drawn his weapon, aiming it steadily at the center of the group. Luca had not moved an inch. He watched the scene with terrifying detachment. "I said let her go," Luca repeated, his voice dropping an octave. "Now get out! Tell Kovac if he sends garbage into my territory again, I will send it back in pieces." Silvio shoved the lead thug toward the door. The man stumbled, clutching his injured arm, his face twisted in hate. He looked back at Eva, his eyes promising a slow, painful retribution. "This is not over," the thug spat, blood dripping from a split lip. "We have unfinished business, girl." "Get out," Luca said. The 3 men scrambled out into the rain, the bell jingling cheerfully behind them, a stark contrast to the violence that had just saturated the room. Silence rushed back into the diner, loud and ringing. Eva stood frozen behind the counter. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. She gripped her left wrist with her right hand, trying to rub the sensation back into the skin, staring at the door as if the monsters might burst back in. She needed to run. She needed to pack her bag and leave the city tonight. They knew where she was. She turned sharply, intending to bolt for the kitchen and out the back exit, but a hand blocked her path. It did not grab her. It just rested gently on her elbow, a warm, firm weight. "Wait," Luca said. Eva flinched violently, pulling away as if burned. She backed up until she hit the prep station, eyes wide and wild. "Please," she whispered. "I did not do anything. I do not know them." Luca stepped into the space behind the counter. Up close. He was overwhelming. He smelled of rain, expensive cologne, and gun oil. He did not crowd her, but he did not back away either. He looked at her wrist, where angry red finger marks were already beginning to darken into bruises against her pale skin. "You know exactly who they are," Luca said. "Luca." His voice was not unkind, but it was relentless. Kovac does not send a hit team for a diner waitress unless she is something more than a waitress. "I am nobody," Eva insisted, her voice cracking. "I am just nobody. Please, just let me go. I do not want any trouble." "You are already in trouble," Luca countered quietly. He watched her face, studying the way her pulse hammered frantically in the hollow of her throat. "Who are you? What do they want with you?" "Nothing," she lied, looking down at her shoes. "They confused me with someone else." Luca reached out, and for a terrifying second, Eva thought he was going to strike her. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek, black business card. He placed it on the counter between them. "Men like that do not get confused," Luca said, "and they do not stop." Eva stared at the card. It had no name, just a gold-embossed emblem of a lion and a phone number. "I do not want anyone else getting hurt because of me," Eva whispered, the confession slipping out before she could catch it. Luca paused. He looked at her. Really looked at her, for the first time. He saw the fraying uniform, the exhaustion carved under her eyes, and the sheer, overwhelming terror that she was trying to hold back with a dam of fragile will. He saw a woman who expected the world to hurt her. "Take the card," Luca said. "If they come back, you call that number, day or night. I cannot—" Eva started. "Take it," he commanded. Her hand trembled as she reached out and slid the card into her apron pocket. It felt heavy, like a lead weight. Luca stared at her for a moment longer. His gaze lingered on the way she wrapped her arms around her own waist, holding herself together as if she were made of cracked glass. An unfamiliar sensation twisted in his chest, not pity, but something sharper, anger. He was angry that someone had made her this afraid. He turned and walked toward the door. The diner owner, a balding man named Frank, was emerging from the back office, looking confused and terrified. "Frank," Luca said, stopping by the register. "Mr. Moretti," Frank stammered. "I heard shouting." "Upgrade your cameras," Luca said, placing a thick envelope of cash on the counter, the payment he had come to collect, or perhaps a payment he was making, he did not clarify, "and put a steel bolt on that back door. The Moretti family is taking a special interest in this establishment from now on." Frank blinked, looking from the cash to Luca. Special interest? Why? Luca glanced back at Eva, who was still standing by the coffee machines, looking like a ghost haunting her own life. "Because I do not like my coffee with a side of intimidation," Luca said. He pushed the door open and walked out into the storm. Inside the back of his armored SUV, the silence was absolute. The leather seats were warm, the windows tinted dark enough to block out the decaying city. "Drive," Luca said. The driver pulled away from the curb. Luca sat in the darkness, watching the lights of the diner fade into the distance. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "It is me," Luca said when the line connected. "I need a background check. Run a trace on a woman working at Frank's Diner on 4th and Main. Name tag said Eva." There was a pause on the other end. "Priority?" "Hi," Luca said, surprising himself. Kovac had 3 soldiers cornering her. They called her an accountant. They said she was a loose end. "Understood. I will have the file in an hour." Luca hung up. He rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the grit of the day. He should not care. She was just a civilian, a drifter caught in the gears of a war that had nothing to do with her. But he could not shake the image of her face, the way her lips had trembled. Yet she had stood her ground. The way she had looked at him, not with gratitude, but with the same fear she held for the men who wanted to kill her. Why did she think she was dangerous? "I don't want anyone else hurt because of me." Luca stared out at the rain-lashed streets of Harborview. He was a man who believed in order. He believed in control. And Eva Carter was a variable he did not understand. He felt a tug in his chest, a strange, protective instinct that growled at the thought of those men touching her again. It unsettled him. Eva's apartment was 4 blocks away. She ran the whole distance, clutching her coat tight, flinching at every shadow. When she got inside, she slammed the door and threw the deadbolt. Then she engaged the chain. Then she wedged a heavy wooden chair under the knob. Only then did she let her legs give out. She slid down the door until she hit the scuffed floorboards. Her breath came in ragged, sobbing gasps. She pulled the black card from her pocket and threw it onto the rickety table as if it were radioactive. Call him. Don't call him. If she called him, she was inviting the Moretti crime family into her life. She would be trading one set of monsters for another. But if she didn't... Eva crawled into her narrow bed, pulling the thin quilt up to her chin. She squeezed her eyes shut, but the darkness behind her eyelids was not empty. Flashback. The smell of gasoline, sharp and stinging. 3 years ago, a warehouse in Jersey. The Kovac crew had forced her to cook the books, to make the inventory look empty so they could claim the insurance, but they had been sloppy. Eva stood by the back exit, the ledger in her hands. She had warned them. She had told them the ventilation system was connected to the residential block next door. They had laughed. Then the match struck. The whoosh of air as the chemicals ignited. The heat was instantaneous, a physical blow. Eva ran. She ran as the windows blew out. She ran as the fire jumped the alleyway. Later, on the news, she saw the faces. 2 families in the adjacent building. Smoke inhalation, burns, a child who would never walk without a cane. She had helped them do it. By staying silent, by doing the math, she had struck the match. She was poison. Everyone who came close to her got burned. Eva rolled over, burying her face in the pillow to stifle a sob. She could not let Luca Moretti help her. If he stood in front of her, the fire would consume him too. She had to leave Harborview. Tomorrow. She would buy a bus ticket to anywhere. The next afternoon, the rain had cleared, leaving the city gray and cold. Eva walked quickly down the sidewalk, 2 plastic grocery bags digging into her hands. She had spent her last $40 on canned food and water for the journey. She kept her head down, wearing a hooded sweatshirt, moving fast. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She stopped. The street was relatively busy with afternoon traffic, but she felt eyes on her. She glanced at the reflection in a shop window. A black sedan was creeping along the curb, moving at walking pace. Eva's heart hammered against her ribs. She turned a corner, walking faster. The car turned too. She broke into a jog. The car accelerated. Ahead of her, the sidewalk narrowed near a construction site. A figure stepped out from behind a stack of plywood. It was the thug from the diner, the one with the broken arm. His arm was in a sling now, bound tight against his chest, but his other hand gripped a telescopic steel baton. He flicked his wrist, and the metal expanded with a sharp snick. Going somewhere. Little bird? He grinned. His face was swollen and purple from the impact with the counter. Eva dropped her grocery bags. Cans of soup rolled across the concrete. She spun around to run back the way she came, but the black sedan had pulled up onto the curb, blocking her retreat. The driver's door opened. She was trapped. "We are going to have a long talk," the thug with the baton said, stepping closer. "And then I am going to break every bone in your hand, one by one." Eva backed up until her spine hit the brick wall of the building. She looked around for a weapon, a rock, anything. There was nothing. "I told you," she said, her voice shaking but loud. "Leave me alone." The thug raised the baton. Tires screeched, a sound like tearing metal. A massive, matte black SUV roared around the corner, hopping the curb and slamming to a halt between Eva and the thug. The sheer size of the vehicle forced the thug to jump back to avoid being crushed. The doors flew open before the wheels stopped moving. 2 men in tactical gear spilled out of the rear, weapons raised. "Drop it!" one screamed. The thug hesitated. He looked at the guns, then at the baton. He dropped the metal rod. It clattered loudly on the sidewalk. The driver's door of the SUV opened. Luca Moretti stepped out. He looked different in the daylight, sharper, colder. He wore a long black coat with the collar turned up against the wind. He did not look at the thug. He walked straight through the line of fire, ignoring the weapons, ignoring the danger, until he stood directly in front of Ava. His eyes were burning with a dark, terrifying intensity. He looked furious. Eva pressed herself against the brick wall, her chest heaving. Luca stopped inches from her. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, checking her for injuries without touching her. When he saw she was unharmed, his jaw tightened. He leaned in, his voice a low growl that vibrated in her bones. "I told you to call me," Luca said. Eva looked up at him. The relief that washed over her was so powerful it made her knees weak, but it was instantly followed by a wave of crushing panic. He was here. He was involved. The fire was already spreading. She stammered. "Get in the car," Luca ordered, leaving no room for argument, but... Luca turned his head, looking at the Kovac thug who was now on his knees with a gun pressed to the back of his head. "Put him in the trunk," Luca said to his men. He turned back to Eva, and for a split second, the anger in his eyes softened into something desperate. "You are not disappearing on me. Eva, not now. Get in the car." Eva looked at the open door of the SUV, then at the man standing before her like a fortress wall. She realized with a sinking heart that she had no choice. She was not running anymore. She was being taken. She stepped toward the car, and Luca was right behind her, his body shielding hers from the street, from the thug, from the world. The heavy door of the SUV slammed shut, sealing out the damp gray afternoon and the noise of the Harborview streets. Inside, the air was still and smelled faintly of leather and high-end antiseptic. Luca Moretti did not sit on the opposite side of the bench seat. He sat right beside Eva, his large frame taking up enough space that his thigh brushed against hers whenever the vehicle turned. Eva scrambled backward until her spine hit the door handle, her chest heaving, through the tinted rear window. She caught a glimpse of Luca's men shoving the Kovac soldier into the trunk of a trailing sedan. The brutality of it, the efficiency, made her stomach turn. "You are making a mistake," Eva gasped, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. "You have no idea what you just started." Luca stared straight ahead, his profile sharp and unyielding against the passing city lights. "I know exactly what I started," he said calmly. "I started the end of it." Eva shook her head, her hands gripping the fabric of her jeans until her knuckles turned white. "You do not understand. They will not stop. You just declared war on the Kovac syndicate over a waitress. Do you know how insane that is? You are just escalating everything." She turned her body toward him, anger momentarily overriding her fear. "Let me out," she demanded. "If I leave the city, they will follow me. That is how this works. I am the target. If you keep me here, you are just painting a bullseye on your own back." Luca finally turned to look at her. His eyes were dark, heavy with a weariness she had not noticed in the diner. He looked at her not as a nuisance, but as a problem he intended to solve with mathematical precision. "You are already marked." "Ava," he said, his voice low and devoid of the aggression she expected. "If I let you out of this car, you will be dead within the hour, or worse. Kovac does not want you gone. He wants you silent, and he enjoys the process of making people quiet." Eva flinched at the bluntness of his words. She knew he was right. She had seen what Kovac did to people who knew too much, but admitting that meant accepting she was trapped. "So what is the plan?" she asked, her voice cracking. "You keep me as a pet, a prisoner. I keep you alive," Luca corrected. "The safest place in this city is wherever I am standing." The car swerved slightly to avoid a pothole, throwing Eva's shoulder against Luca's arm. She felt the muscle beneath his coat. Hard as stone, he did not move away. For a second. In the confined, heated space of the SUV, the proximity was suffocating. She could smell the faint scent of gunpowder clinging to him, mixed with the clean, sharp smell of expensive soap. It was a dizzying combination of danger and civilization. Eva pulled back, pressing herself against the door again. "You cannot save me," she whispered, more to herself than him. Luca did not answer. He just watched the city roll by, his jaw set in a line of grim determination. The penthouse was a world away from the grimy diner and Eva's suffocating studio apartment. It sat atop the spire, a glass needle that punctured the harbor view skyline, overlooking the dark, churning waters of the river. The elevator opened directly into the living space. It was vast, cold, and beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, turning the chaotic streets below into distant, twinkling lights. The furniture was sleek Italian leather, the floors polished concrete. It felt less like a home and more like a fortress designed by an architect who hated clutter. Eva stepped out of the elevator, hugging her arms around herself. She felt small and dirty in her worn hoodie and jeans, a smudge of grease on a pristine canvas. Luca walked past her, tossing his keys onto a marble island in the kitchen. He began unbuttoning his coat, his movements precise and practiced. "Here are the rules," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the large space. "You stay here. You do not leave this floor. The elevator requires a biometric scan to descend. The windows are bulletproof. The terrace is monitored by thermal cameras." Eva stared at him, bristling. "So I am a prisoner." "You are a guest under protection," Luca said, hanging his coat over a chair. "And in return for my protection, you are going to give me something." Eva's stomach dropped. She knew it. There was always a cost. She took a step back, her eyes darting to the elevator, calculating odds she knew were zero. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice tightening. Luca turned to face her, leaning his hip against the counter. He looked at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "I want the truth," he said. "No more lies about being a waitress. No more pretending you are nobody. I want to know exactly why the Kovac Syndicate is willing to start a war in my territory just to get their hands on you." Eva looked away, staring out at the gray river. "I cannot tell you." "Then we are going to have a very long, very quiet night," Luca said. "I will leave," Eva said, turning back to him, her chin lifted in defiance. "As soon as the streets are clear, I am gone. I do not need your charity." Luca walked toward her. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she had to crane her neck to look him in the eye. "There are no clear streets for you anymore, Eva," he said softly. "Not until we finish this." 2 hours later, night had fully fallen over Harborview. The city looked deceptive from this height, peaceful, almost magical, a grid of amber and white lights. Eva sat on a bar stool at the kitchen island, staring at her hands. Luca was moving around the kitchen. It was a strange domestic scene that felt completely at odds with the violence of the afternoon. He was making tea. He placed a steaming mug in front of her. "Peppermint," he said. "It helps with the nerves." Eva looked at the mug, then at him. He had rolled up the sleeves of his dress shirt, revealing forearms that were corded with muscle and dusted with dark hair. On his left wrist, a heavy silver watch gleamed under the recessed lighting. "Thank you," she murmured, wrapping both hands around the ceramic. She squeezed it tight, using the heat to ground herself, to remind her body that she was here, now, and not back in that warehouse 3 years ago. Luca poured a glass of water for himself and leaned against the counter opposite her. "You have good hands," he observed quietly. Eva blinked, surprised. "What?" "You do not have the hands of a waitress," Luca said. "You have calluses on your fingers, but not from carrying trays, from typing, from writing, and you are constantly calculating. I can see it in your eyes. You are counting exits, counting seconds, counting odds." Eva took a sip of the tea to hide her expression. "It is a habit. It is a survival mechanism," Luca corrected. A siren wailed in the distance, rising up from the streets below. Eva flinched, her shoulders jerking up toward her ears, the tea sloshing dangerously near the rim of the mug. Her breath hitched, a sharp intake of air that sounded loud in the quiet room. Luca moved. He did not lunge, but he closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He stopped right beside her stool, close enough that his shadow fell over her. "Hey," he said, his voice dropping to a rumble that she felt in her chest. Eva looked up, eyes wide and panicked. "They are not coming for you," Luca said, holding her gaze. "No one gets up here. No one gets to you. Not while you are in my home." Eva searched his face for a lie, for the arrogance she expected from a man in his position. She found only a steady, rock-solid certainty. He believed it, and because he believed it, a small, treacherous part of her wanted to believe it too. The distance between them had shrunk to inches. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. She could hear the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. The smell of him, soap and man and heat, filled her senses, pushing back the memory of smoke. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them grew heavy, charged with a sudden, confusing awareness of the other person's physical presence. Then Luca cleared his throat and stepped back, breaking the spell. "Come here," he said, gesturing toward the living room wall. "I want to show you something." Eva slid off the stool, her legs feeling unsteady. She followed him to a massive digital screen mounted on the far wall. It displayed a detailed map of Harborview, divided into color-coded zones. "This is the security grid," Luca explained. He stood behind her as she looked at the map. He was close, his body acting as a warm wall at her back. He reached past her to point at a sector highlighted in blue. His arm brushed her waist, a light, fleeting contact that sent a jolt of electricity straight up her spine. Eva stiffened, her breath catching. She did not pull away. "Everything in blue is under my direct control," Luca said, his voice right by her ear. "The docks, the warehouse district, the financial center. Nothing moves in these areas without me knowing. Kovac operates in the red zones to the south." Eva stared at the blue zones. It was half the city. "You talk about the city like you own it," she said, trying to inject some bite into her voice to mask her racing heart. "Like it is a game board." Luca lowered his hand, but he did not step back. He turned his head, looking down at her profile. "It is not a game," he said. "It is a responsibility. Order requires structure. If I do not hold it, chaos takes over. Men like Kovac take over." Eva turned to face him. They were impossibly close now. She had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "And what makes you different from him?" she challenged. "You both use violence. You both have soldiers. We are nothing alike," Luca said. His eyes dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second before snapping back to her eyes. "I have a code. I protect what is mine." The words hung in the air. "What is mine?" Eva felt a flush rise in her cheeks. The desire that sparked between them was sudden and sharp, a physical pull that terrified her more than the Kovac hit squad. She saw the hunger in his eyes, restrained but undeniable. He wanted to touch her, and God help her, she wanted to lean into him. She stepped back abruptly, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I am tired," she said breathlessly. "I need to sit down." Luca watched her retreat to the sofa, his expression unreadable. He turned back to the map, his jaw clenching as he stared at the red zones. Later that night, Luca sat in his office, the glow of monitors illuminating his face. His tech specialist had come through. The file on Eva Carter was open on the screen. Her real name was Elena Vane. Former scholarship student, mathematics prodigy, 3 years ago. She had been working as a bookkeeper for a logistics firm in Jersey, a firm that turned out to be a front for the Kovac syndicate. Luca read the report, his stomach tightening. She had been coerced, forced to alter records, forced to write code that hid trafficking profits, and then, the fire. The report detailed a warehouse fire staged for insurance fraud. It was supposed to be empty. It was not. 2 families in the adjacent tenement had been hospitalized. 1 woman died. Eva had fled the next day. She had mailed a drive full of encrypted evidence to a federal agent. 2 weeks later, that agent was found dead in a car accident that was anything but accidental. Luca leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. It all made sense now. The guilt, the fear. She did not just think she was a victim. She thought she was an accomplice. She believed she was toxic, that her attempts to do the right thing only got good people killed. She thinks she deserves this, Luca whispered to the empty room. The storm returned after midnight. Lightning flashed over the river, followed by a crack of thunder that shook the glass walls of the penthouse. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The power grid in the city wavered, plunging the penthouse into total darkness for 10 seconds before the backup generators kicked in. In the guest room, Eva woke up screaming. The darkness was not just darkness to her. It was smoke, It was the suffocating blackness of the warehouse. She scrambled out of bed, gasping for air, her lungs burning with phantom heat. She needed out. She needed to breathe. She stumbled through the unfamiliar room, crashing into a side table, and tore open the glass door leading to the terrace. The wind hit her like a physical blow, cold and wet. She stumbled to the railing, gripping the cold metal, gulping down the air. She was shaking so violently her teeth rattled. "Eva!" The voice came from behind her. She spun around, wild-eyed. Luca stood in the open doorway. He was barefoot, wearing only dark lounge pants and a white t-shirt. He saw her standing in the rain, shivering in her thin, oversized shirt, her face pale as the moon. He did not ask if she was okay. He knew she was not. He stepped out into the rain, unbuttoning the heavy wool coat he had grabbed on his way out. He walked up to her and draped it over her shoulders. The coat was heavy, warm, and smelled of him. Eva clutched the lapels, pulling it tight, but the shivering did not stop. "It was dark," she whispered, her voice jagged. "It was so dark." Luca moved behind her. He did not touch her skin, but he pressed his chest against her back, using his body to shield her from the wind. He placed his hands on the railing on either side of her, effectively boxing her in, creating a sanctuary of warmth. "The lights are back on," Luca murmured, his mouth close to her ear. The generators kicked in. "Look, the city is still there." Eva looked out at the skyline. The lights were indeed back, steady and bright. "I cannot do this," she sobbed softly. "I cannot be here. I am poison. Luca, everywhere I go, things burn. You are not poison," Luca said firmly. "You are a survivor." Eva turned in his arms. She did not step away. She looked up at him, the rain plastering her hair to her forehead, in the dim light from the city. She saw him clearly for the first time. She saw the faint, jagged scar running along his jawline. She saw the shadows under his eyes. She saw a man who was just as tired as she was, a man who carried the weight of 1,000 bad decisions, most of which he had made to keep other people safe. Without thinking, she lifted a hand. She wanted to touch that scar. She wanted to know if he was as hard as he seemed, or if he broke too. Her fingers hovered inches from his face. She hesitated, fear warring with a sudden, overwhelming tenderness. Luca did not pull away. He watched her hand, his eyes darkening. Slowly, gently, he reached up and wrapped his fingers around her wrist. He did not push her hand away. He guided it. He pressed her palm against his cheek, letting her fingers trace the line of the scar. His skin was rough with stubble, hot to the touch. Eva's breath hitched. The contact was electric. It was more intimate than a kiss. Luca turned his face slightly into her palm, his eyes closing for a brief second. His thumb began to stroke the sensitive skin on the inside of her wrist, right over her pulse point. He could feel her heart racing, skipping beats. For a moment, the rain did not exist. The war did not exist. There was only the heat of his skin and the rough pad of his thumb against her wrist. They leaned in, drawn together by a magnetic force that defied logic. Their faces were inches apart. Eva could feel his breath on her lips. She wanted him. The realization terrified her. She pulled her hand back as if she had touched a hot stove. She stepped back, hitting the railing. "Men like you," she whispered, her voice trembling, "do not save women like me without a price." Luca opened his eyes. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a look of intense, frustrated longing. He swallowed hard, the muscles in his throat working. "The only price is the truth." "Eva," he said roughly, "tell me what happened. Tell me why you run." Eva looked at him, cornered. She looked at the man who had burned a path through 3 armed soldiers to get to her. She looked at the man who was currently shielding her from the storm with his own body. She broke. It was a setup. She began, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I was the bookkeeper. They made me cook the books. They made me hide the inventory." Luca did not speak. He just listened, his gaze fixed on her face. "I told them the ventilation system was connected," Eva said, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "I told them, but they lit the match anyway. The fire moved so fast, I heard them screaming. The families next door. I heard the children screaming, "Luca!" And I ran. I just ran. She was sobbing now, the 3 years of guilt pouring out of her. I gave the evidence to an agent, Agent Miller, and they killed him. They killed him because of me. Everyone who tries to help me dies. Luca listened to every word. His jaw tightened until a muscle feathered in his cheek. His anger was a palpable thing, radiating off him in waves, but it was not directed at her. It was a cold, lethal fury directed at the men who had broken her. When she finished, she stood there, shaking, waiting for him to tell her she was right, waiting for him to tell her she was responsible. Luca stepped forward. He reached out and cupped the back of her neck. His hand was large, warm and firm. It was a grounding touch, anchoring her to the earth. He tilted her head up so she had to look at him. "Kovac lit the match," Luca said fiercely. "Not you. You were a hostage. You did what you had to do to survive, but they died," Eva whispered, "and Kovac will pay for every single one of them." Luca vowed. His voice was low, deadly, and absolute. He moved his thumb along the line of her jaw. "No one hurts you again, Eva. Not while I am breathing. Do you understand me?" Eva looked into his eyes and saw the truth there. He meant it. He would burn the city down to keep his promise. "I understand," she whispered. Luca held her gaze for a second longer, the tension between them vibrating in the air. He wanted to kiss her. She could see it. She could feel it in the way his hand tightened slightly on her neck. But he did not. He respected the line he had drawn. "Go inside," he said gently. "Get some sleep." Eva nodded. She slipped out of his coat and handed it back to him, her fingers brushing his. "Good night, Luca." She turned and walked back into the warmth of the penthouse, in the guest room. Eva closed the door and leaned her back against it. She slid down until she was sitting on the floor, hugging her knees. She could still feel the imprint of his hand on her neck. Her skin burned where he had touched her. She closed her eyes and let out a shaky breath. She hated herself for it, but in the center of her fear, there was a new feeling. She wanted his arms around her again. She wanted him to stand between her and the world forever. In his office, Luca stood by the window, looking out at the rain-soaked city. He did not turn on the lights. He knew what was coming. Kovac would not back down. The intel Eva had provided, the fact that she was a witness to arson and murder, made her a threat that Kovac could not ignore. To keep her safe, Luca would have to go to war, a real war. Not a skirmish over territory, but a scorched earth campaign that would leave scars on Harborview that might never heal. He looked at his reflection in the dark glass. He looked tired, and he should cut her loose. He should give her a new identity, a plane ticket, and send her to Europe. It was the logical move. It was the safe move. But as he remembered the way she had looked at him on the balcony, the way she had touched his scar, he knew he wasn't going to do that. He was going to keep her. And if he had to burn the city to the ground to do it, then let it burn. The war room in the penthouse was a study in controlled chaos. For the past 3 days, the sleek mahogany dining table had disappeared beneath layers of topographical maps, satellite printouts, and tablets displaying live feeds of the city. The air was thick with the scent of espresso and the ozone hum of overheating electronics. Eva Carter sat at the far end of the table, a stark contrast to the hardened men surrounding her. She wore a simple gray sweater Luca had provided, her hair pulled back in a severe knot, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the scrolling lines of code on the laptop in front of her. She was not a prisoner anymore. She had become an architect of her own survival. "Here," Eva said, her voice cutting through the low rumble of conversation between Luca and his lead enforcer. "Silvio." The room went quiet. Luca turned from the window, where he had been watching the rain lash against the glass. He walked over to stand behind her chair, placing one hand on the back of the wood. "What do you see?" Luca asked. Eva pointed to a string of transactions on the screen. "Kovac is moving money through a shell corporation in the shipping district. It looks like a legitimate import business for exotic textiles, but the weight ratios in the shipping manifests do not match the product. They are too heavy." Silvio frowned, leaning over the table. So, maybe they are bad at paperwork. They are not bad at paperwork, Eva corrected, her tone confident. They are smuggling hardware. The weight discrepancy matches the density of ammunition crates. If you cross-reference this with the delivery schedule for the warehouse on 4th Street, you will see a pattern. They are restocking. Luca leaned closer, his eyes narrowing as he tracked the data she highlighted. He smelled of rain and sandalwood, a scent that had become distractingly familiar to Eva over the last 72 hours. "You are sure?" Luca asked. "I am sure," Eva said. "I wrote the algorithm they used to mask these kinds of transfers 3 years ago. They never changed the base code. They are arrogant." Luca straightened up, looking at Silvio. "Hit the 4th Street warehouse tonight. Burn it before they can distribute the inventory." Silvio nodded, a newfound respect in his eyes as he glanced at Eva. "Understood, boss." As the men cleared out to mobilize, the room suddenly felt vast and empty. The adrenaline that had sustained Eva through the briefing began to crash, leaving behind a dull, throbbing ache at the base of her skull. She slumped slightly in her chair, rubbing her temples. Luca did not leave with the others. He moved to the sidebar, the clinking of crystal loud in the silence. "You have a gift," he said quietly. Eva let out a dry laugh, keeping her eyes closed. "It is not a gift, it is a curse. It is the reason people die around me." Luca walked back to the table and set a glass of water down near her hand. He circled behind her again, but this time, he did not look at the screens. He looked at the tension radiating from her posture, the way her shoulders were hiked up toward her ears, the tight line of her neck. "You are carrying the weight of the entire city right there," Luca murmured. Before Eva could respond, she felt the warmth of his hands hover over her shoulders. She stiffened instinctively, her breath hitching in her throat. He did not touch her immediately. He waited, giving her a second to pull away, to tell him to stop. When she did not move, he lowered his hands. His thumbs pressed into the knotted muscles at the base of her neck. The pressure was firm but incredibly careful, as if he were handling something that might shatter. Eva let out a small, involuntary sound, half sigh, half whimper, as he worked a particularly tight knot loose. "Relax," Luca instructed, his voice low and vibrating near her ear. Eva tried to fight it. She tried to keep her guard up, to remember that he was a dangerous man and she was a liability. But his hands were relentless. They were large and hot, moving with a rhythmic, hypnotic cadence that melted her resistance. Her head fell forward, her chin resting on her chest, exposing the vulnerable curve of her neck to him. Luca's fingers drifted lower, kneading the tension from her shoulders through the soft wool of her sweater. He could feel the delicate structure of her bones beneath the muscle. It terrified him, how fragile she felt, and yet how much steel she held in her spine. "You did good tonight," he said softly. Eva closed her eyes, letting herself lean back into his touch. For a moment, just a moment. She allowed herself to feel safe. The sensation was intoxicating. "It does not change anything," she whispered, though her voice lacked its usual fire. "It changes everything," Luca countered. His hands stilled, resting heavy and warm on her shoulders. His thumbs brushed the sensitive skin at the side of her neck, just above her collar. The movement was barely there, a ghost of a caress, but it sent a shiver racing down Eva's spine. Her breath quickened, the sound audible in the quiet room. Luca felt her pulse jump beneath his fingertips. The air between them shifted, thickening with a sudden, suffocating awareness. He was standing too close. He was touching her not as a protector, but as a man. He stared down at the nape of her neck, fighting the urge to lean down and press his lips to the skin he was soothing. Eva opened her eyes, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt it too, the pull, the gravity. She turned her head slightly, just enough to see his profile in her peripheral vision. "Luca," she started, but she did not know what she wanted to say. The moment shattered with the ringing of his phone. Luca pulled his hands away instantly, the loss of contact leaving Eva cold. He answered the call, his voice shifting from velvet to granite in a split second. "Moretti." He listened for 10 seconds, his expression hardening into a mask of pure fury. "When?" he demanded. "Is the perimeter compromised?" He listened again, then hung up. He did not look at the map anymore. He looked at Eva. "We have to go," he said. "What happened?" Eva asked. Standing up, her legs feeling unsteady. "Kovac hit the Onyx Club," Lucas said, moving toward the hallway to grab his coat. "Drive-by. Automatic weapons. They shot up the facade and the line of people waiting to get in." Eva covered her mouth with her hand. "Oh, God. Was anyone hurt?" "3 civilians wounded. One of my doormen is critical." He stopped, turning to face her. "There is more. They dumped a car on the sidewalk in front of this building 2 minutes ago. It is riddled with bullets." Eva felt the blood drain from her face. And there was a message painted on the windshield," Lucas said, his voice grim. "Hand her over and this stops." Eva swayed, gripping the edge of the table for support. Nausea rolled in her stomach. Acid and hot. It was her fault. The people at the club, the doorman, they were bleeding because she was breathing. "I have to surrender," she whispered. "Luca, I have to go down there." "You are not going anywhere but with me," Lucas snapped, grabbing her arm as she made a move toward the door. "Do you think they will stop if you surrender? They will kill you, and then they will burn the city anyway, just to show they can." He pulled her toward the private elevator. "Pack a bag. You have 3 minutes. We are burning the location. This place is no longer secure." The ride to the safe house was a blur of rain-slicked streets and tension so thick it was hard to breathe. They were in the back of an unmarked sedan, sandwiched between 2 escort vehicles. The windows were tinted black, sealing them into a capsule of darkness. Eva sat pressed against the door, staring at her hands. Every time the car hit a bump, she was thrown slightly toward Luca. The space was too small. Their knees brushed with every turn. Phones chimed incessantly in the front seat, reports of skirmishes, police movements, fire crews responding to the club. The city was waking up, and it was angry. Eva flinched at a particularly loud siren passing by. Without a word, Luca reached across the seat. He did not grab her hand, he just placed his hand on the leather seat between them, palm up, inches from her thigh. It was an offer, an anchor. Eva looked at his hand. It was the same hand that had soothed her pain an hour ago. Tentatively, she shifted her own hand until her pinky finger brushed against his. He did not close his fingers around hers, but he did not pull away. The contact was minute, barely physical, but it screamed of connection. "Why?" she whispered into the dark. "Why are you doing this? You could end this tonight if you gave me to them." Luca did not look at her. He watched the rearview mirror, his eyes scanning for threats. "I do not trade lives, Eva, and I do not let monsters dictate my choices. It is a bad business decision," she said, her voice cracking. Luca turned his hand over, covering hers completely. His grip was warm and solid. "I am not a businessman tonight," he said. The safe house was on the industrial edge of Harborview, a converted loft in a defunct textile factory. It was a fortress of red brick and iron, stark and cold compared to the glass luxury of the penthouse. By the time they arrived, the storm had turned violent. Thunder shook the foundations of the old building, and rain hammered against the metal roof like shrapnel. Luca's men secured the perimeter downstairs, leaving Luca and Eva alone in the main living space. It was a vast, open room with exposed beams and a single worn leather couch facing a blocked-off fireplace. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died. Eva gasped, the sound sharp in the sudden silence. The darkness was absolute. "Stay where you are." Luca's voice came from the void, calm and steady. She heard the scratch of a match. A small flame flared to life, illuminating Luca's face. He moved around the room, lighting a series of thick emergency candles he had pulled from a supply crate. The golden light cast long, dancing shadows against the brick walls, softening the harsh industrial edges of the room. He came over to the couch where Eva sat, rigid with anxiety. He sat down next to her, close, but not touching. "Talk to me," Luca said. "You are vibrating." "I can't breathe," Eva admitted, pressing a hand to her chest. "I feel like the walls are closing in. I feel like I am back in the warehouse." She turned to him, her eyes wide and glassy in the candlelight. "You cannot save me, Luca," she said, the words spilling out in a rush. "I wreck everything. Look at your city. It is bleeding because of me. My friend Jamie. If they find out I know her. Everyone I touch gets hurt. It is a curse." Luca's jaw clenched. He turned his body fully toward her, his knee bumping hers. "It is not a curse," he said roughly. "It is war. And in war, things break. But I am the reason." Eva cried. "No," Luca said. His voice dropped, becoming intimate and raw. "You want to know about curses? When I was 22, my brother Matteo was shot in a drive-by. It was over a dispute about territory. He was 17. He was just walking home from school." Eva stopped breathing. She stared at him, seeing the pain that usually hid behind his stoic mask ripple across his face. "I was the one who told him to walk that route," Luca continued, his gaze fixed on a flickering candle flame. "I thought it was safe. I thought I had everything under control. I held him while he bled out on the pavement. I could not save him. Luca," Eva whispered, "I built this empire," Luca said, looking back at her, his eyes burning with intensity. "I took the throne. I organized the families. I set the rules. No trafficking, no kids, no loose ends. I did it so that the chaos that took Matteo would never happen again. I control the chaos. Eva, that is my life." He leaned closer, his voice fierce. "So do not tell me I cannot save you. I decide who I can save, and I decided on you." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy and electric. He had peeled back his armor, showing her the wound that drove him. He wasn't a king protecting a prize. He was a man trying to prevent another tragedy. Eva felt her heart crack open. The fear that had defined her for 3 years began to recede, replaced by something warmer, more dangerous. She reached out, her hand trembling. She placed her palm flat against his chest, right over his heart. She could feel it thudding beneath the crisp cotton of his shirt. Strong, steady, alive. "You are going to get yourself killed," she whispered. Luca covered her hand with his own, pressing it harder against his chest. His eyes darkened, the pupils blowing wide until they were pools of black ink. "Then I die trying," he said. The air in the room seemed to vanish. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows across his face that emphasized the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the fullness of his mouth. Luca moved his hand from her chest to her face. He cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with agonizing slowness. His skin was rough, his touch reverent. He searched her eyes, looking for panic, looking for a no. Eva did not pull away. She leaned into his palm, her breath hitching. She looked at his mouth, then back up to his eyes. "Luca," she breathed. He leaned in slowly, giving her every second to stop him. When she didn't, he closed the final inch. His lips were soft at first, a question rather than a demand. It was a tentative brush of warmth against warmth. Eva let out a small sigh, her lips parting slightly. That sound was the spark. Luca groaned low in his throat and deepened the kiss. It wasn't gentle anymore. It was starving. His hand slid from her cheek to the back of her neck, tangling in her hair, tilting her head back to deepen the angle. Eva's hands bunched in his shirt, pulling him closer. The taste of him, mint and scotch and man, overwhelmed her senses. The fear was gone, incinerated by the heat radiating from his body. She shifted, needing to be closer. Without thinking, she moved her legs, climbing onto his lap, straddling his waist. Luca's hands dropped to her hips, gripping her firmly, holding her steady. He wasn't rough, but the strength in his fingers was undeniable. He held her like she was the most precious, fragile thing in the world. Even as he devoured her mouth, the kiss grew urgent, messy, tongues met, breaths mingled in harsh gasps. Eva pressed her body against his chest, feeling the hard wall of his muscles, the rapid beat of his heart matching hers. A fierce, unfamiliar hunger woke up inside her, a need to be consumed, to be owned, to be part of him. But as his hand slid up her back, pressing her closer, a flash of lightning illuminated the room. The sudden flash brought reality crashing back. Eva froze. The image of the warehouse, the fire, the danger, I am a weakness, the thought screamed in her mind. If I let him do this, I am just another thing for his enemies to use against him. I am distracting him. I am going to get him killed. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced the haze of desire. She tore her mouth away from his, gasping for air. No, she said, the word coming out like a sob. No, I can't. She scrambled backward, sliding off his lap, nearly tripping over the coffee table in her haste to put distance between them. She stood there, chest heaving, touching her swollen lips with shaking fingers. I'm sorry, she stammered. I can't do this. I am sorry. Luca sat on the couch, breathing just as hard. His hair was messed up where her hands had been. His shirt rumpled. He looked wrecked. He took a deep breath, scrubbing a hand over his face. Then he looked up at her. There was no anger in his eyes, no rejection, just a dark, simmering intensity that made her knees weak. Ava, he said, his voice rough with unused desire. He stood up slowly, raising his hands to show he wasn't going to reach for her. You do not have to apologize, he said. He took a step back, putting more space between them. I am not going to push you, he said firmly. Your no matters more than what I want. We stop. Eva stared at him, stunned. She was used to men who demanded, the Kovac crew, the world, but Luca Moretti, the monster, the crime boss, was giving her the control. The realization rattled her more than the kiss. Get some rest, Luca said, his voice returning to a semblance of calm, though his eyes were still burning. I will take the first watch. He turned and walked toward the window, staring out at the storm, his back a rigid line of tension. Eva retreated to the bedroom at the back of the loft. She closed the door and leaned against it, her heart still thudding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She touched her lips again, tasting him. She slid down to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. She had thought Luca was a monster she needed to survive. Now, she realized the truth was far more terrifying. He was a man she could love. And falling in love with Luca Moretti was the most dangerous thing she had ever done. It would not just burn her, it would burn everything. The morning light filtering through the high, grimy windows of the warehouse safe house offered no warmth. It only served to illuminate the dust motes dancing in the stale air and the deep lines of exhaustion etched into Luca Moretti's face. He stood by the makeshift tactical table, his phone pressed to his ear, his back rigid. Eva sat on the edge of the worn leather sofa, a mug of cold coffee in her hands, watching him. The tension from the previous night, the almost kiss, the raw confession of his brother's death, still hung between them like a charged wire. Luca listened to the voice on the other end of the line, and Eva saw his knuckles turn white as he gripped the device. Are you sure? Luca asked. His voice was terrifyingly quiet. There was a pause. Bring him in, Luca said, and do not let him speak to anyone else. He ended the call and lowered the phone slowly to the table. He stared at the blank screen for a long moment, his chest rising and falling with a heavy, controlled breath. What is it? Eva asked, standing up. Her legs felt weak. Luca turned to her. His eyes were hard, flinty, but behind the anger, she saw a flash of profound hurt. Marco, he said. Eva's breath caught. She knew Marco. He was one of Luca's top lieutenants, a man who had laughed with them in the car 2 days ago. He's been selling our movements to Kovac, Luca said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The location of the club, the route to the safe house. He gave them everything. Eva felt the blood drain from her face. Why? Money, Luca said, dismissing the motive with a sharp wave of his hand. It does not matter why. It matters that the circle is broken. We are not safe here. We have to move again. He turned back to his maps, instantly shifting into general mode. But Eva remained frozen. She looked at the man who was trying to hold up the sky for her, and she saw the cracks forming in the foundation. His empire was crumbling from the inside out, turning brother against brother. All because of her. I am the reason Marco turned, she whispered. Luca looked up sharply. No. Marco turned because he is greedy. He turned because the pressure is too high, Eva argued, her voice rising. Because you are risking everything for one woman who is not worth it. People are getting hurt. Luca, your people? Stop, Luca commanded. I will not stop. Eva stepped closer, her hands shaking. How many more? How many more fires? How many more betrayals? As many as it takes. Luca growled. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door to speak with the guards outside, the conversation clearly over in his mind. But for Eva, it was the final straw. She watched him walk away, his shoulders burdened by the weight of a war she had started, and she knew what she had to do. She could not let him burn for her. 20 minutes later, the safe house was a hive of activity as Luca's men prepared for extraction. In the chaos of packing crates and loading weapons, no one noticed Eva slip out the side exit. She moved quickly through the alleyways of the industrial district, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had left a note on the tactical table, weighted down by her coffee mug. It was short. It was brutal. It was the only way to save him. Do not follow me. I am ending this. If I turn myself in, the war stops. Please, just let me go. She reached a rusted payphone outside a convenience store 3 blocks away. Her fingers trembled as she punched in the number, a number she had memorized 3 years ago, the direct line to the Kovac logistics manager she had once worked under. It rang twice. This is Eva Carter. She said when the line clicked open, I want to make a deal. Luca found the note 10 minutes after she left. He read it once, then he read it again. The paper crumbled in his fist. A sound tore from his throat, a roar of pure, unadulterated fury that made every man in the room freeze. He swept the tactical map off the table with a violent swipe of his arm, sending tablets and papers crashing to the concrete floor. Where is she? Luca bellowed, spinning around to face his security team. Who was watching the side door? The men looked at each other, pale and wide-eyed. Find her! Luca screamed. Track her phone, now! He was not just angry. He was terrified. The kind of terror he had not felt since he held his dying brother in his arms. He knew exactly what Kovac would do to her. They would not just kill her. They would make it last for days. They would break her piece by piece, and they would send him the videos. Boss, I have a signal. His tech specialist shouted from the corner. She turned her phone back on. She is moving south. Toward the old parking structure on 5th. Luca was already moving. Get the car. Everyone moves. If we are late, we burn the whole district down. The parking structure was a concrete skeleton on the edge of the city, a monument to a failed development project. It was gray, damp, and smelled of urine and rot. Eva stood on the 3rd level, the wind whipping her hair across her face. She hugged her arms around herself, trying to stop the shaking. She felt small. She felt terrifyingly alone. A black van screeched up the ramp, tires squealing on the concrete. 4 men jumped out. Eva recognized the man in the lead. It was Dmitri, the middle manager who used to hover over her desk and check her math. He looked older now, harder, wearing a leather jacket that cost more than her life's earnings. Well, Dmitri sneered, walking toward her. The little accountant returns. I want to talk to Kovac, Eva said, trying to keep her voice steady. I will surrender. I will sign whatever confession you want. I will give you the encryption keys. But the attacks on Moretti stop. That is the deal. Dmitri laughed. It was a cold, dry sound that echoed off the concrete pillars. You think you are in a position to make deals? He asked, shaking his head. You are not a player. Eva, you are a loose end, and Kovac does not negotiate with loose ends. He signaled to the men behind him. Grab her. Eva took a step back. Wait, I have information. You have nothing. Dmitri spat. You are just an example now. An example of what happens when you steal from the family. The men lunged. Eva turned to run, panic seizing her legs, but she was not fast enough. A rough hand grabbed the back of her jacket, jerking her backward. She screamed as she was slammed into a concrete pillar, her shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. Pain exploded down her arm. She kicked out, connecting with a shin, but the man just grunted and tightened his grip, twisting her arm behind her back until she cried out, "Put her in the van," Dmitri ordered, lighting a cigarette. "We will have some fun before we kill her." "No!" Eva screamed, struggling uselessly against the crushing weight of her captor. "Let me go!" The sound of an engine roaring up the ramp cut through her scream. A massive SUV drifted around the corner, sideways, smoke pouring from its tires. It did not slow down. It accelerated straight toward the group. Dmitri dived out of the way. The man holding Eva froze for a split second. The SUV slammed into the parked van, the metal crunching with a deafening impact. Doors flew open. Luca Moretti emerged from the driver's seat. He did not look like a businessman. He looked like a demon. His coat was gone, his dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, a heavy pistol in his hand. "Get away from her!" Luca roared. Gunfire erupted. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Bullets sparked off the concrete beams, sending chips of stone flying like shrapnel. Eva dropped to the ground, covering her head as chaos unleashed around her. She saw Luca moving through the smoke, firing with terrifying precision. He was not taking cover. He was advancing. He was coming for her. The man who had been holding her pulled a knife, dragging Eva up by her hair to use as a shield. Luca saw it. His eyes went black. He dropped his gun. He charged. He hit the man with the force of a freight train, tackling him away from Eva. They hit the ground hard, rolling over broken glass and debris. Luca was on top of him instantly, his fists raining down with a brutality that made Eva look away. It was over in seconds. Luca stood up, breathing hard, his knuckles bloody. The other Kovac men were down or fleeing, chased by Luca's soldiers who had arrived in the second car. Luca turned to Eva. She was huddled against the pillar, clutching her bruised shoulder, her face streaked with tears and grime. He fell to his knees in front of her. His hands hovered over her face, shaking violently. He checked her eyes, her neck, her arms, touching her everywhere to make sure she was whole. "Eva," he choked out. "Eva." He grabbed her face between his hands, forcing her to look at him. His skin was hot, damp with sweat. "What were you thinking?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "You could have been killed. Do you have any idea what they would have done to you? I wanted it to stop." Eva sobbed, the adrenaline crashing into hysteria. "I just wanted it to stop. Luca." A groan from nearby cut through the moment. Eva looked past Luca. One of his young soldiers, a boy named Leo who couldn't have been more than 20, was lying on the ground, clutching his thigh. Blood was pooling dark and fast on the gray concrete. "Medics!" Luca shouted over his shoulder, but he did not let go of Eva. Eva stared at the blood. It was bright red. It looked fake, but the smell of iron was sickeningly real. "See?" she whispered, horror choking her. "Look at him. Luca. He's bleeding. Because of me." Luca grabbed her shoulders, his grip tight enough to bruise. He shook her once, hard. "Look at me," he commanded. Eva dragged her eyes away from the wounded boy to meet Luca's gaze. "This is not on you," Luca hissed through gritted teeth. "This is Kovac. This is the life. If it was not you, it would be a shipment. It would be a territory line. It would be an insult at a poker table. They would find an excuse. No." Eva pushed against his chest, her tears streaming freely now. "I am the excuse. I am the poison. Everything I touch burns. Luca, why can you not see that? You should have let me go. I will never let you go." Luca roared back. He stood up, dragging her up with him. He slammed her back against the concrete pillar, not to hurt her, but to pin her, to keep her from crumbling, to force her to feel the reality of his presence. His body pressed against hers, hard and unyielding. One of his hands gripped her hip, digging into the denim. The other slammed against the pillar beside her head, boxing her in. He leaned in, his face inches from hers. She could feel the heat radiating off him, the sheer, raw power of his anger and his fear. "You think you are trash?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, vibrating growl. "You think you are something to be thrown away to wolves like them? I am trying to save you," Eva screamed back, hitting his chest with her fists. "I am trying to save you from me. You do not get to decide that," Luca said. He lowered his forehead to hers. His breathing was ragged, harsh. He was shaking. The man who controlled a city, who stared down gun barrels without blinking, was shaking because he had almost lost her. "You are mine to save." "Eva," he whispered, the words sounding like a prayer and a threat all at once. And I burn the world before I let them touch you. He lifted his head. His thumb reached up, swiping a tear aggressively from her cheek. His eyes dropped to her mouth. The air between them ignited. It was no longer just fear. It was adrenaline. It was survival. It was a desperate, clawing need to prove that they were both still alive. Luca didn't ask this time. He crashed his mouth onto hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was fierce, possessive, and terrified. It tasted of salt and sweat and the metallic tang of fear. Eva didn't pull away. She gasped against his mouth and then, with a sob, she surged forward. Her hands fisted in his ruined jacket, pulling him closer, needing to feel the solid weight of him against her. She opened to him, and he took everything. His tongue swept into her mouth, deep and demanding. His hand at her hip tightened, pulling her body flush against his until there was no air left between them. She could feel the hard ridge of his weapon against her leg, the pounding of his heart against her breasts. It was chaotic. It was messy. It was the most honest thing she had ever felt. Luca's hand tangled in her hair, tilting her head back, exposing her throat. He broke the kiss to bury his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling sharply, his lips pressing hot, frantic kisses to her pulse point. "I have you," he murmured against her skin, his voice wrecking her. "I have you." Eva clung to him, her knees giving out, supported only by his grip and the pillar behind her. For the first time, she didn't feel like poison. She felt like the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. "Boss!" The shout snapped them apart. Luca pulled back, his chest heaving, his eyes blown wide and black. He looked at her swollen lips, at the flush on her neck, and for a second, he looked like he wanted to kill the man who had interrupted them. He took a deep breath, stepping back and erecting his walls again, though his hands lingered on her arms for a second too long. He turned. His second-in-command was standing there, looking uncomfortable. "Leo is stable," the man said, "but we need to move. The police are 5 minutes out." Luca nodded. He looked back at Eva. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was iron. "We are going home," he said. The return to the penthouse was silent, but the silence had changed. It was no longer filled with secrets. It was filled with a heavy, inevitable weight. Night had fallen by the time they walked into the main room. The city outside the glass walls glittered, indifferent to the violence that had just occurred in its shadow. Luca did not go to the shower to wash off the blood. He walked straight to the massive map of Harborview on the wall. He stood there for a long time, staring at the blue zones, his zones. Eva stood in the doorway, hugging a blanket around her shoulders. She watched him. She saw the set of his shoulders, the way his hand kept balling into a fist at his side. "Luca?" she asked softly. He didn't turn around. "They used my mercy against me," he said quietly. "I kept the peace. I kept the violence contained, and they thought it made me weak." He picked up a red marker from the tray. He uncapped it. He drew a thick red line through the warehouse district. Then he drew another line through the docks. Then another through the financial hub where his own money laundering operations ran. "What are you doing?" Eva asked, walking closer, dread coiling in her stomach. "I am changing the game," Luca said. He turned to face her. He looked calm now, terrifyingly calm. "Kovac wants a war? I will not give him a war. I will give him a funeral." He pointed to the map. "Tonight. We hit the warehouses. Tomorrow, the docks. I am going to burn every asset I have that they can use. I am going to collapse the criminal economy of this city." Eva stared at the map. Those were his revenue streams. Those were the pillars of his empire. "Luca," she said, her voice trembling, "if you do that, you lose everything. You lose the city." "I built this city to control the chaos," Luca said. "If the city threatens you, then the city has to go." He walked over to her. He stopped inches away, looking down at her with an intensity that made her knees buckle. "I told you. Eva, I decide who I save." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers grazing her cheek. "I am burning it all down," he whispered. "And when the smoke clears, if we are both still standing, Then we figure out what is left." Eva looked at him. This man who was willing to incinerate his life's work just to keep a promise to a woman who thought she was broken. Tears pricked her eyes again, but they weren't tears of guilt this time. They were tears of awe. "Okay," she whispered. Luca turned back to the map. He picked up his phone. "Silvio," he said into the receiver, "get the boys ready and bring the incendiaries." He looked at the reflection of Eva in the glass, standing behind him, watching him destroy his kingdom for her. "We are going to light up the sky." The destruction of Harborview did not begin with a bang, but with a whisper. It started as a series of quiet, calculated evacuations that rippled through the industrial sectors like a phantom tide. Luca Moretti was dismantling his empire, but he was doing it with the same surgical precision that had built it. He would not be the butcher Kovac was. On Tuesday morning, the foreman at the Western Dry Docks received a call about a severe chemical leak. By noon, 300 workers had been cleared from the waterfront now, complaining about lost wages but safe in their homes. On Wednesday, the fire marshal, a man whose children's college tuition Luca had paid for years, condemned 3 nightclubs in the entertainment district for sudden structural instability. The patrons were turned away. The staff sent home with severance pay in cash envelopes. Eva watched the news from the high-rise penthouse, her heart sitting high in her throat. The anchors called it a mysterious wave of infrastructure failures. Eva knew it was a clearing of the board. Then, the fires began. They were not wild, raging infernos at first. They were strategic strikes. A warehouse filled with Kovac smuggled electronics went up in a sheet of blue flame at 2 a.m. A distribution hub for the syndicate's narcotics trade suffered a catastrophic electrical fault an hour later. Luca stood before the massive digital map in the living room, a ghost in his own home. The room was dark, lit only by the glowing screens and the distant, flickering orange glow rising from the city below. He held a secure tablet in one hand, tapping commands that cost millions of dollars with each keystroke. "Sector 4 is clear of civilians." A voice crackled over the speakerphone. "Burn it," Luca said. His voice was devoid of emotion, flat and hard as granite. Eva stood in the hallway shadows, watching him. She saw the way his jaw worked, the tension radiating from his shoulders. He was torching his legacy. Every warehouse that burned was revenue lost. Every dock that closed was power surrendered. He was stripping himself of the armor he had worn for a decade, leaving himself naked before his enemies, just to ensure there was nothing left for Kovac to leverage against her. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. By the third night, the city felt like a pressure cooker waiting to explode. The air in the penthouse was stale, recycled, but it could not filter out the psychological weight of the smoke rising outside. It was nearly 4 a.m. when the elevator chimed. Eva had been pacing the living room, unable to sleep, unable to focus on the book she had been pretending to read. She spun around as the doors slid open. Luca stepped out. He looked like a man who had walked through hell and brought the soot back with him. His tailored black coat was gone, lost somewhere in the chaos. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms smeared with grime and grease. There was a dark smudge of ash across his cheekbone, and his hair was wild, windblown and dusted with gray debris. But it was his eyes that stopped Eva's breath. They were hollowed out by exhaustion, rimmed with red, yet burning with a fierce, terrifying resolve. "Luca," Eva breathed. She crossed the room before she realized she was moving. She stopped inches from him, her hands hovering, afraid to touch him, afraid he might shatter if she did. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice trembling. Luca looked down at her. He seemed to have trouble focusing for a moment, as if dragging himself back from a very far, very dark place. "No," he rasped. His voice sounded like gravel grinding together. "Not me." Eva reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched his chest. She felt the heat radiating off him, a feverish intensity that had nothing to do with illness. Her fingers found a dark stain near his collarbone. She rubbed it gently, fearing it was dried blood, but it flaked away under her touch. "It is just ash," she whispered, relief flooding her veins so quickly it made her dizzy. Just ash. Luca did not move. He stood there, letting her check him, letting her hands roam over his arms, his chest, his face. He closed his eyes when her thumbs brushed the soot from his cheek, leaning into her touch with a desperation that broke her heart. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly, her eyes searching his face. "You are destroying everything you built. You are burning your own kingdom." "Luca?" Luca opened his eyes. He reached up and wrapped his fingers around her wrists, halting her movements but keeping her hands pressed against his chest. "I am tired, Eva," he said. The confession was quiet, but it hit the room with the force of a scream. "I am tired of the strategy. I am tired of the game. I am tired of pretending that any of this matters more than you." Eva's breath hitched. "He is doing it for me," she thought, the realization finally sinking in fully. Not for pride, not for war, for me. I am not worth a city. "Luca," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes, "I am not worth all this ruin." Luca's grip on her wrists tightened. He pulled her closer, eliminating the space between them until their bodies brushed. "If Harborview has to burn for you to live, then let it burn," he said fiercely. "I would strike the match 1,000 times. I would tear down every brick I ever laid if it means you are standing there when the smoke clears." The raw emotion in his voice shattered her last defense. The walls she had built around her heart, the belief that she was poison, that she deserved to be alone, crumbled into dust. Eva stepped in. She pulled her hands free from his grip and cupped his face, her fingers threading into the hair at the nape of his neck. "You are a fool," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. She pulled his head down and kissed him. This was not the desperate, adrenaline-fueled collision of the parking garage. This was slow. It was deep. It was a surrender. Luca let out a low groan, a sound of pure relief, and wrapped his arms around her waist. He lifted her slightly, drawing her up against him, burying his face in her neck for a moment before finding her mouth again. He tasted of smoke and scotch and sorrow. He walked her backward, his movement steady and sure, until her back pressed against the cool glass of the window wall. Behind her, the city burned in patches of orange and red, but Eva saw none of it. Her world had narrowed down to the man in front of her. Luca braced his forearms against the glass on either side of her head, caging her in. But his body was not pressing her down. He was holding himself back, his muscles trembling with the effort of restraint. He kissed the corner of her mouth, her jaw, the sensitive hollow beneath her ear. "Eva," he murmured against her skin, "tell me to stop. Tell me now, because in a minute I will not be able to walk away." Eva's hands roamed over his shoulders, feeling the hard ridges of tension in his back. She felt him shudder as her nails lightly traced the damp skin of his neck. "I do not want you to stop," she whispered. "I do not want to be saved. Luca, not if it means you are alone in the fire." Luca pulled back to look at her. His eyes were dark, searching hers with an intensity that made her soul ache. "You are not nothing," he said, answering her earlier fear. "You are everything. Bricks and money are dust. You are the only real thing I have found in 10 years. He kissed her again, and this time, the restraint snapped. The heat between them flared, consuming the oxygen in the room. His hand slid down to her waist, pulling her hips flush against his. Eva gasped, her body arching into him, an instinctive, ancient response to his proximity. They moved toward the bedroom in a haze of shared need. There was no fumbling, no awkwardness. It felt like gravity. Inside the darkened room, the only light came from the distant fires reflecting off the ceiling. Luca slowed down again. He unbuttoned his shirt and let it fall to the floor, revealing the map of scars on his torso. Old bullet wounds, knife slashes, the physical history of his violence. Eva reached out and traced the long, faded white line across his ribs. She did not flinch. She touched him with reverence, acknowledging the pain he had survived. Luca watched her hand, his expression softening into something profoundly tender. He reached out and began to undress her, his fingers deft but gentle. He treated her not like a conquest, but like a revelation. When skin finally met skin, The sensation was electric. They moved together on the bed, limbs tangling. Luca hovered over her, his weight supported on his elbows, protecting her even now. He paused, his eyes locking onto hers, a silent question, a check-in. "Are you okay?" Eva nodded, reaching up to pull him down. Yes. The act was passionate, fueled by the danger outside and the months of simmering tension, but it was grounded in a deep, abiding tenderness. Every touch was a reassurance. His hand cradling the back of her head, her lips pressing soft kisses to his shoulder. He moved with a slow, powerful rhythm, and Eva met him, her hands clutching his back, anchoring him to her. It was a conversation without words, a promise made in the dark. We are in this together. No matter what burns, we do not burn alone. When the crest came, it was a release of everything, the fear, the guilt, the years of running. Eva clung to him, burying her face in his neck, and felt him shudder against her, his strength finally breaking into vulnerability in her arms. Afterward, the silence in the room was heavy and sweet. They lay tangled in the high thread count sheets, a cocoon of warmth against the cold world. Eva rested her cheek on Luca's bare shoulder, listening to his heart rate slowly return to normal. His arm was draped over her, his hand idly tracing abstract patterns on her bare back, his fingers warm and rough. "Luca?" Eva whispered into the dark. His voice was deep, laced with sleep and contentment. "What happens if we make it?" she asked. "If we survive tomorrow?" Luca's hand stilled on her back for a moment, then resumed its gentle motion. "We leave," he said quietly. "Leave Harborview. Leave the life," he said. "There are accounts I have hidden. Clean money, enough for 2 lifetimes. We could go to the coast, somewhere north, where the ocean is cold and the towns are small." Eva closed her eyes, imagining it. A small house, the smell of salt water instead of smoke, a bakery, maybe. "Do you think we can?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Do you think I can ever really stop running?" She shifted, propping herself up on one elbow to look at him. "I still see the fire. Luca. When I close my eyes, I still hear them screaming. I am afraid that even if we go to the end of the world, I will still be poison. I will still be the girl who breaks things." Luca reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His gaze was steady, clear in the shadows. "You did not break things. Eva, you survived them." He sat up slightly, the sheet falling to his waist, and cupped her face. "I am not trying to erase your past," he said. "I cannot do that. You will carry those scars forever, just like I carry mine." He took her hand and placed it on the old bullet wound on his side. "But the scars do not have to own you. I am giving you a future where the past is just a memory, not a cage." Eva looked at him, feeling a swell of love so powerful it terrified her. He was not offering her a fairy tale. He was offering her a reality she could live in. "Okay," she whispered, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "To the coast, to the coast," Luca promised. But the world outside did not care about promises. An hour later, Luca's burner phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a harsh, jarring sound that sliced through the peace of the room. Luca sat up instantly, the softness vanishing from his face, replaced by the mask of the dawn. He grabbed the phone. "Speak," he answered. He listened for 30 seconds, his eyes narrowing. Eva sat up, pulling the sheet around her chest, the cold dread pooling in her stomach again. She watched him, knowing the moment of peace was over. Luca hung up. He did not look at her immediately. He stared at the wall, his jaw working. "What is it?" Eva asked. "Kovac," Luca said. "He is done running. He has consolidated his remaining forces." "Where?" "The Riverside Hospital complex," Luca said. Eva gasped. The old hospital had been abandoned for years, a sprawling labyrinth of concrete and rot on the edge of the river. It was a fortress. "He's digging in," Luca explained, standing up and reaching for his discarded clothes. "He knows I have cut his supply lines. He knows his money is drying up. He's cornered." "So we wait?" Eva asked. "We wait for him to starve." "We cannot wait," Luca said, pulling on his pants. "He has hostages." "Eva." He took the night shift workers from the sanitation plant nearby. He's using them as shields. He wants me to come to him. Eva watched him dress, seeing the armor go back on, the gun, the knife, the coat. What is the plan? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Luca paused. He turned to look at her, and she saw the hesitation in his eyes. He did not want to tell her. The hospital is isolated, Luca said. It is surrounded by old industrial fuel reserves and timber yards. No, Eva whispered, shaking her head. Luca, no. I cannot storm the building, he said. He has heavy machine guns in the lobby. If I send men in, they die. If I try to negotiate, the hostages die. So you are going to burn it, she said. I am going to burn the perimeter, Luca corrected. I am going to set a ring of fire around the complex. I will cut off his escape. I will force the oxygen out. I will smoke him out like a rat. And if the fire spreads? Eva asked, standing up, clutching the sheet. If the wind changes? That complex is full of chemicals. It is full of asbestos. If you light that fire, you could poison the river. You could kill the hostages before they ever get out. It is the only way to end this tonight, Luca said. He walked over to her. He did not touch her this time. He looked at her with a sad, grim finality. I have to end it. Eva, if Kovac survives tonight, he vanishes. And if he vanishes, you will never be safe. I will never be able to take you to the coast. He turned and walked toward the door. Luca! Eva called out. He stopped in the doorway. You said you control the chaos, she said, tears streaming down her face. This is not control. This is madness. It is war, Luca said. He walked out. Eva stood alone in the bedroom, the smell of their intimacy still lingering in the air, mixed now with the acrid scent of the burning city. She walked to the window. She looked toward the river. She could see the dark silhouette of the hospital complex against the skyline. She realized then that Luca was going to do exactly what he said. He was going to burn the world to save her. And she realized that if she did not stop him, or find a way to change the outcome, there would be no coast, there would be no quiet mornings, there would only be ash. She dropped the sheet and began to scramble for her clothes. She could not stay here. She could not watch him become the monster he had spent his life fighting. She had to go to the river. The silence in the penthouse was heavier than the storm that had raged 2 nights ago. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room, leaving only the low, static hum of the police scanners on the table. Harborview was holding its breath. Luca Moretti stood by the kitchen island, checking his weapon. The movement was rhythmic, almost meditative. He slid the magazine into place with a sharp metallic click that echoed off the glass walls. He wore a tactical vest over his black shirt, and his face was set in a mask of stone. He looked like a statue carved for a tomb. Eva stood in the doorway of the bedroom, watching him. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of pure dread. She looked at the digital map on the wall one last time. The Riverside district was glowing with red markers. The trap was set. The fire was ready. She walked toward him, her footsteps silent on the polished concrete. "Luca," she said. Her voice was steady, but it cost her everything to keep it that way. He did not look up immediately. He holstered the weapon at his hip and picked up a radio. "We move in 20 minutes, he said to the empty room, or perhaps to the ghost of the man he used to be. Eva reached out and placed her hand on his forearm. The muscle beneath the fabric was rock hard, coiled with tension. "You do not have to do this," she said. "There is still time to call it off. We can leave now. We can just go." Luca finally turned to her. His eyes were dark, devoid of the warmth she had seen in the bedroom hours ago. He was the Don again. He was the man who had burned a city to keep a promise. "If we leave now, Kovac survives," Luca said. "And if Kovac survives, he will hunt you. He will find us in the north. He will find us on the coast. I am not leaving a shadow behind me. Eva, I am burning the shadow away." Eva looked at him, feeling the tears prick her eyes. She saw the love driving him, but she also saw the madness. He was willing to level half a district, to risk innocent lives, to risk his own soul, just to make sure she never had to look over her shoulder again. "You cannot save me by burning the world," she whispered. Luca stepped closer. He reached up and cupped her face in his hands. His thumbs brushed her lower lip, a touch so gentle it made her want to weep. "I am not trying to save a saint, Eva," he said softly. "I am saving a woman who has already paid enough. You have paid for your survival in blood and guilt for 3 years. Tonight, I pay the bill." He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of finality. It tasted of goodbye. It tasted of ashes and inevitability. He pressed his forehead against hers for 1 long second, breathing in her scent, memorizing the feeling of her skin against his. "Stay here," he commanded. "Do not look out the window. Do not turn on the news. Wait for the phone to ring." He pulled away, his hand lingering on her cheek until the last possible moment. Then he turned and walked out the door, followed by his shadow guards. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing him away from her. Eva lasted 10 minutes. She stood in the center of the living room staring at the map. The red dots were blinking. The police scanner was buzzing with frantic voices. Code 3 at the riverside. Multiple explosions reported. Structure fire at the old hospital complex. She grabbed the remote and turned on the television, the screen filled with shaky helicopter footage. Black smoke was curling into the night sky, blotting out the stars. Orange flames were licking at the roof of the abandoned hospital. But it was not just the hospital. The fire had jumped the perimeter. A row of old timber warehouses nearby was catching. The wind was pushing the smoke toward the residential blocks 3 streets over. Eva felt the blood drain from her face. It was spreading. He had miscalculated. The fire was too big. She saw the flashing lights of ambulances struggling to get through the roadblocks. She imagined the people trapped in those houses. She imagined the hostages Luca had mentioned, the sanitation workers Kovac was using as shields. "I can't," she whispered to the empty room. "I can't watch this." She could not stand by and watch Harborview turn into a graveyard for his war. If innocent people died tonight, it would break Luca. He would survive the battle, but the guilt would destroy the man she loved. He would become the monster he feared, driven by a mix of terrified love and desperate resolve. Eva ran to the bedroom. She grabbed a dark jacket and pulled on her boots. She grabbed the spare cash Luca had left on the dresser, not for herself, but for bribes if she needed them. She knew the city. She had spent 3 years learning its veins and arteries to hide in them, and she knew Luca's routes because she had helped him plan them. She slipped out of the penthouse, bypassing the main elevator and taking the service stairs down 40 flights. Her legs burned, but she did not stop. She burst out into the alleyway behind the building and started running toward the river. The air in the Riverside district was thick enough to chew. It tasted of sulfur and burning tar. Eva pulled her sleeve over her mouth, coughing as she navigated the back streets. The sky above was glowing and angry, bruised orange. Ash fell like gray snow, coating the pavement, swirling in the updrafts created by the heat. She was forced to detour twice to avoid police barricades. The sounds of war were louder here, the pop, pop, pop of automatic gunfire, the deep, booming concussions of fuel tanks exploding, the wail of sirens that seemed to be coming from every direction. She reached the edge of the industrial zone surrounding the hospital. The heat hit her like a physical wall. The hospital complex loomed ahead, a fortress of concrete wreathed in smoke. She saw figures moving in the haze, Luca's men. They were advancing on the main entrance, using the burning wreckage of cars for cover. "Luca!" she screamed, but the roar of the fire swallowed her voice. She pushed forward, ducking under a broken chain-link fence. She had to find him. She had to make him stop. She had to tell him that Kovac wasn't worth this. Inside the hospital lobby, Luca Moretti was fighting a ghost. The air was filled with dust and drywall. He moved with clinical precision, firing 2 shots at a Kovac soldier on the balcony, then moving to cover behind a concrete pillar. "Clear," Silvio shouted from the left flank. Luca ejected a magazine and slapped a new one in. His mind was ice cold, focused entirely on the tactical layout of the room. But beneath the ice, a fire was burning. He wanted this done. He wanted Kovac dead so he could go home to the woman waiting in the glass tower. "Boss!" The shout came from his radio. It was the lookout on the south perimeter. "What is it?" Luca snapped, firing a suppression round down the hallway. "We have a civilian breach on the south side." The lookout yelled, panic edging into his voice. "Female. Dark hair. She is running toward the main building. Boss, it looks like the girl. It looks like Eva." Luca froze. For a split second, he stood completely exposed in the middle of the firefight. A bullet chipped the floor inches from his boot. But he did not flinch. The ice in his mind shattered. The blood in his veins turned to liquid nitrogen. "Repeat that," Luca roared into the headset. "She is inside the perimeter. She is heading for the south entrance. The structure above the south entrance is compromised. It is coming down." "No," Luca breathed. The word was a prayer and a curse. He abandoned his position. He abandoned the plan. "Fall back," he screamed to his men. "Secure the perimeter. I am going south." "But boss, Kovac is—" Silvio started. "I said fall back." Luca turned and sprinted back the way he had come, plunging into the thickening smoke. He did not care about the enemy fire. He did not care about the burning ceiling tiles raining down around him. He only cared about the terrifying realization that the fire he had lit to save her was now threatening to consume her. Eva was lost. The smoke inside the south wing of the hospital was blinding. Her eyes watered so badly she could barely see her own hands. She stumbled over debris, coughing violently, her lungs burning with every breath. "Luca!" she choked out. She heard a rumble above her. She looked up just as a massive wooden beam, eaten away by fire, gave way. She threw herself backward. The beam crashed down inches from her feet, sending a shower of sparks and heavy debris into the air. The impact shook the floor and blocked the hallway ahead of her. She was trapped. She pressed herself against the wall, sliding down until she hit the floor. She pulled her knees to her chest, trying to find a pocket of clean air near the ground. "This is it," she thought, a strange calm washing over her. "I tried to save him, and now I am going to die in his fire. Eva." The voice was hoarse, desperate, barely audible over the roar of the flames. "Luca!" she screamed back, gathering every ounce of strength she had left. "I am here." She heard boots slamming against concrete. She saw a shadow moving through the orange haze. Luca appeared through the smoke like a wraith. He was covered in soot, his face streaked with sweat and black grime. His eyes were wide, wild with a terror she had never seen in him. He scrambled over the fallen beam, ignoring the heat, ignoring the flames licking at his boots. He landed in front of her and dropped to his knees. "Eva!" He grabbed her, his hands frantic as he checked her for injuries. "Are you hit? Are you burned?" "I am okay," she gasped, clutching his vest. "I am okay. Luca, you have to stop this. You have to stop the fire." He did not listen. Rage and relief collided inside him, making him shake. He grabbed her face, his fingers digging into her skin. "Why are you here?" he yelled, his voice breaking. "I told you to stay. I told you to wait. I couldn't watch you burn the world," she cried. He made a sound that was half sob, half growl. He shrugged off his heavy tactical jacket and wrapped it around her, pulling the hood up over her head to shield her from the sparks. "We are leaving," he said. "Now." He hauled her to her feet. He wrapped one arm around her waist, lifting her almost off the ground, and began to drag her back toward the exit. They burst out of the south exit into the alleyway. The heat outside was almost unbearable. The building next door was fully engulfed now, the flames reaching hundreds of feet into the air. The city skyline looked like the rim of a volcano. Luca dragged her toward the perimeter wall, ducking behind a dumpster as a fuel tank exploded in the distance. He looked at the fire. He looked at the way it was spreading toward the residential zone. He looked at Eva, huddled in his jacket, her face black with soot, coughing the smoke from her lungs. He realized then that he had lost control. The chaos he thought he could master had grown too big. If he let this continue, thousands would die. Eva would live with that guilt forever. It would kill her spirit just as surely as a bullet. He had to end it. He pulled his encrypted phone from his pocket. His hand did not shake. "What are you doing?" Eva asked, wiping her eyes. Luca looked at her. His eyes were sad, but they were clear. "I am saving you," he said. He dialed a number. "This is Agent Miller's secure line." A voice answered on the other end. "Who is this?" "This is Luca Moretti," he said. Eva gasped. She grabbed his arm. "Luca? No. Listen to me," Luca said into the phone, his voice steady. "I am at the Riverside Hospital complex. The Kovac syndicate is inside. They have hostages in the basement level. The building is rigged with explosives on the structural columns. We know about the fire." "Moretti," the agent said. "We are sending units. You are not fast enough," Luca said. "Enter through the north loading dock. It is the only unrigged entrance. Kovac is on the 3rd floor. Go now, and you save the hostages." He hung up. He dropped the phone on the ground and crushed it under his boot. He had just given the federal government the location of his rival, but he had also placed himself at the scene of a domestic terror event. He had admitted to knowing the layout. He had signed the death warrant for his empire. "Why?" Eva whispered, staring at him. "Because you were right," Luca said. "I cannot save you by being the monster." Police sirens were converging on the area now. Helicopters circled overhead, their searchlights cutting through the smoke. Luca grabbed Eva's hand. "Run!" He led her down a narrow side alley, away from the main police line. A nondescript sedan was waiting there, idling. One of Luca's oldest friends, a man named Sal, was behind the wheel. Luca opened the back door. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He shoved it into Eva's hands. "Get in," he ordered. Eva resisted. "No, you are coming with me." Luca shook his head. He looked back toward the approaching lights of the federal agents. "They need a villain. Eva, if I run, they will keep hunting. They will tear the city apart looking for me, and they will find you." He pushed the hair back from her forehead. "I stay. I end it here. No." Eva grabbed his shirt, her fingers tangling in the fabric. "I am not leaving you. I love you." Luca froze. It was the first time she had said it. He leaned down and kissed her. It was hard, desperate, pouring everything he couldn't say into that final contact. He kissed her like he was trying to breathe his life into her lungs. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. He pulled back. He looked at Sal. "Get her out, Sal. New IDs, the safe house on the coast. Go." Sal nodded, his face grim. "I promise." "Boss." Luca pushed Eva into the car and slammed the door. "Luca!" Eva screamed, pounding on the glass. The car peeled away, tires screeching. Eva turned in the seat, looking out the back window. She saw Luca Moretti standing alone in the alleyway. The smoke swirled around him like a cloak. In the distance, she saw figures in body armor moving toward him, weapons raised. Luca did not raise his gun. He raised his hands, not in surrender to them, but in acceptance of the cost. He stood tall, the king of ashes, watching the taillights of the car fade into the darkness. He had burned his city. He had lost his crown, but he had saved her. Epilogue. 6 months later, the ocean air smelled of salt and pine, a sharp contrast to the memory of smoke that still lingered in Eva's nightmares. The town was small, perched on the edge of the rocky coastline in Maine. It was a place where people minded their own business and paid in cash. Eva, now calling herself Sarah, wiped the flour from her hands. She worked in a small bakery near the pier, waking up before dawn to knead dough. The rhythm of it was soothing. It was simple. It was safe. She walked out of the bakery, locking the door behind her. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of purple and gold. She walked to her small cottage at the end of the lane. She checked the mailbox, a habit she couldn't break. It was usually empty, save for flyers. Today, there was an envelope. It was plain white, no return address. Eva's heart skipped a beat. She stood there on the porch, the wind whipping her hair across her face, staring at the paper. Her hands shook as she tore it open. Inside, there was a single photograph. It was a grainy picture of the Harborview riverfront. Scaffolding covered the old hospital site. Cranes were in the sky. The city was rebuilding. There was a note clipped to the back of the photo. The handwriting was jagged, hurried, but unmistakably familiar. Still breathing. The lawyers are good. The deal was better. They traded the king for the kingdom. I am out in 3 years. Still looking for you. Wait for me. Eva traced the letters with her fingertip. A sob caught in her throat, but it turned into a laugh. He was alive. He had traded his empire, his secrets, and his power to the feds in exchange for a lighter sentence. He had destroyed the Moretti crime family to become just a man who could come find her. Eva looked out at the ocean. For the first time in 3 years, she did not look over her shoulder. She looked forward. Maybe, she whispered to the wind, he did save me after all. She tucked the photo into her pocket and smiled. A quiet, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She would wait. She would bake bread and watch the tides, and she would wait for the day the man in the dark coat came walking up her driveway, ready to live the quiet life he had bought for them with fire. Closed your message. Thank you so much for listening to You Can't Save Me. She shook, but the Mafia boss burned a city, just to keep her safe. I hope you enjoyed this journey of danger, sacrifice, and redemption. I would love to hear your thoughts on Luca's final choice. Did he do the right thing by giving up his empire for Eva? Let me know in the comments below, and please tell me where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far our stories travel. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. We have many more passionate and thrilling tales coming your way. Thank you for your support, and until next time.